diets, do they work? Why do people do
Yeah, okay.
random diets, or the dangers, or how that can, like, yeah, how would you
Yeah.
go down
So
that track?
when we're looking at fat loss now, like, yeah, because granted, there's a lot of surfers out there who do want to get leaner for surfing, and for whatever reason, that's completely fine, obviously. So yeah, we would be looking at doing a dedicated dieting phase. Typically, it can be done with more of like a habit-based, approach, and it sort of happens in the background, which can be actually more beneficial for a lot of people, actually, not most people. But look, do diets work? Yeah, they sure as hell work, when they're adhered to. So in terms of making a diet work, we have principles, and really any diet that ticks those boxes off can elicit fat loss. But that doesn't mean that they're a good idea. If that diet is highly restrictive, if it encourages, like, dichotomous good or bad, black and white thinking, if it's super low calorie, it
Mm.
can create other issues, deficiencies, malnutrition, low energy availability in athletes. And I think a big one, though, which is really prevalent, is eating disorders and disordered eating and poor body image. I
Yeah.
think that is the biggest danger with dieting. But back to the question of, do diets work? Yeah, they work in the short term when adhered to, but I think a better question is, well, what happens,
Mm.
5 years later? It
Yeah.
will be 5 years later. If you do a 12-week dedicated fat loss phase, will you still be roughly the same weight 5 years later?
Mm.
And that's when I think the statistics, or the chances of success, are far lower, very low. Am I an advocate for dedicated fat loss phases? Yeah, sure, typically. But they just need to be done right. Okay. So when I say done right, we don't look at foods as good or bad. We adopt an approach that is feasible, and fits the individual's preferences and lifestyles. Um, the diet still ticks the boxes in terms of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and basic healthy eating principles. The calorie intake is appropriate, and that calorie intake isn't necessarily tracked or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, however you manage to control your calories, they're not too low. So let's say you maintain your weight on 2,500 calories, which is pretty bog standard for most just general males, right? Roughly about that. Or it could be more. It's obviously going to be more for athletes. So let's say you maintain your weight on 2,500 calories, right? If you wanted to get leaner, you might go 10% below that or 20% below that, and that's all you need. People, big, like 100-kilo blokes doing 1,000-calorie diets, 1,200-calorie diets, they might maintain their weight at 3,500 calories. It's like, well, that's not conducive to, because that's at a point where the calories are so low that your bodily function is going to suffer. And then that's when you get things like increased risk of injury. That's when you get suppressed immunity. That's when you get suppressed reproductive function, and testosterone plummets to the floor. In females, there's
Wow.
no menstrual cycle, and they could even become infertile. You get low bone mineral density. You go and get hammered out in a surf, and all of a sudden you've got stress fractures in your lower back or something. So it's certainly a sweet spot, and lower calorie is not better. But back to the psychological side of things, I think that's the biggest part of it, like the biggest danger, the disordered eating. If you tell someone to track their calories, all of a sudden they build a dependence on tracking their calories, and they can't eat out with their friends unless they've tracked this. And all of a sudden their social health suffers, and they're scared to hang out with their friends. And, when they don't track, they freak out and then binge because they feel like they've failed. And then they gain the weight back, and then they feel crap about their body image. And it's just this just terrible cycle. So I think the dieting phase has to be set up for a very non-dichotomous, okay, this is a short phase and we have a plan to exit this dieting phase in a way that is kind of graded, and it doesn't encourage these negative thoughts and thought patterns. You have to be really careful, and like there's a screening process before you go about a diet. It's
interesting.
So I hope that answers the question. But technically speaking, all diets can work. All diets can work, technically speaking.
Yeah, but it's the because it's it'd be quite a shock on the system, I would imagine, like you suddenly go, right, I'm going to go on this fad diet for, let's say, 6 weeks, and I'm cutting all the stuff out that I would normally have, and I'm just going to focus on a very small sort of calorie intake, and I'm cutting protein or something out as well. Like, what's the risk to reward with that kind of go?
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, you don't need to do all that stuff. You don't need to cut out all these foods. Like, you don't need to stop having an indulgence. You don't need to stop hanging out with friends. You can even have a couple of drinks a week. You know, you can go out for social meals. It's all about managing those things because they are high in calories and they add calories. So obviously there needs to be a level of, I guess, sacrificing quotations and control. But look, every single diet that has ever elicited fat loss, regardless of how it was, whether they cut carbs, cut out processed sugar, did the keto diet, did the vegan diet, every single time someone has achieved fat loss with a diet, it's all for the same fundamental underlying reason. Okay, you cut out carbs, you do the keto diet. Oh, carbs are the issue. As soon as I cut them out, I lost heaps of weight. Good on you, Sally. What you've done here is cut out calories, not carbs. Okay. And obviously, when I'm talking to a client, I'm very empathetic and I'm not condescending and I don't kill them. But because people don't know, and you have to, understand that. But yeah, you know, it's like, oh, I cut out gluten. It's like, okay, well, you stopped eating all these high calorie foods that are really palatable and tasty. And, you also started going to the gym and like being more health seeking and eating more veggies. I'm like, okay, so you ate less calories.
Yeah.
That's always the fundamental reason.
Yeah.
And I think once we understand that it's principles, not methods, we identify the principle and then we fit the diet method or the strategy or the approach within what's going to work for us. But it's the same reason why it works.
Totally. Yeah. That's but interesting, and it is just good to just reiterate those points as well about diets and the rule of thumb is what would it's just good moderation of food, and then eating like your plants, eating your like lean meats or whatever. I mean, it seems like common sense, but it seems like we seem to completely butcher all those sort of fundamentals. Is that you think that's right, or?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely right. Like, like logic, kind of when you pull it back, it is very simple. Fat loss is very simple, but we do have moving targets like how many calories we burn, how many calories are in the food. Even if we're tracking our food like really rigidly using best practice technique, there's still going to be variance just for things that we can't control, like how the food was stored, how long it's been on the shelf for, like just there's so many moving targets. But I think the biggest reason why it's difficult is because we're humans. We have thoughts and feelings. We have emotions. And, like you hear people say things, and I used to even say this myself. It's like, okay, if your dog was overweight, what would you do? You'd feed it less food and you take it for more walks. But it's a different situation because humans have all these other things going on. And, you're talking behaviors, you're talking habits, you're talking just a myriad of just stuff. That whilst on paper what you need to do is simple in theory, in practice in the real world, it's certainly difficult. And look, if it was as simple as the theory side of things, I wouldn't have a job. People would just go on Google, download some meal plan or something, and they would be great and they'd lose the weight, they'd keep it off, and it'd be all hunky-dory. But that's not the case, and we have researchers trying to figure out, well, what can we do about the obesity pandemic? And they're getting really into it, and it's freaking complicated. So but typically speaking, people do overcomplicate it. Like, it's always like, what foods should I cut out? What foods should I avoid? What's bad? What's good? Will inflammation or something make me fat, or whatever it is? It's just like, nah, bro. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. Like, yeah, okay, simple basics, sure. Should I tell someone to do that? Absolutely. Because the problem with the basics though is they're not sexy. You can't sell them. They're so simple that people are like, nah, bro, you're trying to trick me. It's definitely like that, my gut health or something. Like, that's my issue, So yeah, it's a big challenge.
Yeah. No, that's cool, mate. That's good insights.